The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, Montana, when rancher Jake Morrison pulled up to the old courthouse in his battered pickup truck. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel as he stared at the briefcase on the passenger seat, containing every last dollar he had scraped together from selling his prize cattle. What he was about to do would either save 2 innocent lives or destroy what remained of his failing ranch. By evening, the entire county would know his name, but not for the reasons he expected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake Morrison had never imagined his life would come to this. 3 years ago, he owned one of the most prosperous cattle ranches in Whitewater County, with over 300 head of cattle grazing across 2,000 acres of prime Montana grassland. The Morrison Ranch had been in his family for 4 generations, passed down from his great-grandfather, who had claimed the land during the homestead era of the 1880s. Now, at 42 years old, Jake was watching everything his ancestors had built crumble like autumn leaves. The drought had started 2 summers back, the worst in recorded history for their region. What began as a few missed rain cycles quickly escalated into a devastating natural disaster that left the once green pastures brown and barren. The local creek that had fed his cattle for over a century dried up completely, forcing Jake to truck in water at enormous expense. Feed costs skyrocketed as hay became scarce throughout the state. One by one, he had been forced to sell off his cattle just to keep the remaining animals alive. His wife, Sarah, had passed away from cancer the previous winter, leaving behind medical bills that consumed their savings and pushed the ranch deeper into debt. Without her steady income from teaching at the local elementary school, Jake found himself juggling mounting expenses with rapidly diminishing resources. The bank had already served him 2 foreclosure notices, and he knew the 3rd would be final. That Tuesday morning in October, Jake sat in his empty kitchen, staring at the stack of overdue bills spread across the oak table his grandfather had handcrafted. The silence in the house felt oppressive without Sarah's cheerful humming or the sound of her grading papers by the window. He had exactly $847 left in his checking account, and 3 weeks before the bank would seize the property. The phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. Sheriff Tom Bradley's gruff voice came through the receiver with news that would change everything. "Jake, I've got a situation here that's eating at me something fierce. You know I wouldn't normally involve civilians, but I'm at my wit's end." Tom had been Jake's friend since high school, and the strain in his voice was unmistakable. "We've got 2 kids, twins, brother and sister, about 8 years old. Their parents died in a car accident 6 months ago, and they've been shuffled through the system ever since." Jake listened as Tom explained how the children had been placed with their uncle, a man named Vernon Cross, who ran what appeared to be a legitimate foster care operation outside of town. But Tom had received disturbing reports from neighbors about children working long hours in Cross's fields, picking vegetables and hauling equipment under the scorching sun. When social services investigated, they found the twins, Marcus and Maya, along with 4 other children, living in deplorable conditions in a converted barn. "The thing is, Jake, Cross is demanding payment for taking care of these kids. Says he's owed for food, shelter, and clothing. The county's broke, and the state won't intervene because it's tied up in legal red tape. These kids are going to end up back with him unless someone steps in." Jake's throat tightened as Tom continued. "I know you're going through hell with the ranch and all, but I also know the kind of man you are. Sarah always said you had the biggest heart in the county. These kids need someone who understands what it means to fight for what's right." The amount Cross was demanding was $3,200, money he claimed the twins owed for 6 months of care. It was more than Jake had, but as he looked around the empty house where he and Sarah had dreamed of raising children of their own, something stirred in his chest. Sarah had suffered 3 miscarriages during their marriage, and they had talked about adoption many times before her illness made it impossible. After hanging up with Tom, Jake spent the rest of the day walking his property, thinking about the choice before him. He climbed the hill behind the house where Sarah was buried, her simple headstone bearing the inscription, "Beloved wife and teacher." The wind whispered through the dry grass as he sat beside her grave, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "What would you do, Sarah?" he whispered to the empty air. "We've got nothing left to lose, but these kids, they've got everything to gain." That evening, Jake made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He drove to the bank early the next morning and withdrew his remaining savings. Then he made a call to his neighbor, Pete Williams, who had been eyeing Jake's prize-breeding bull for months. "Pete, remember how you said you'd pay top dollar for Thunder if I ever needed to sell? Well, I need to sell." Thunder was the last piece of Jake's ranching legacy, a magnificent Black Angus bull worth $8,000, whose bloodline had produced champion cattle for 15 years. Selling him meant admitting defeat, acknowledging that the Morrison ranch was truly finished. But as Jake watched Pete's trailer disappear down the dirt road with Thunder in the back, he felt something unexpected. Not regret, but resolve. Chatidum. Meeting with Vernon Cross took place at the courthouse, with Sheriff Bradley serving as mediator. Cross was a thin, wiry man in his 50s with calculating eyes and a permanent sneer. He arrived with a folder full of receipts and documents, claiming to itemize every expense related to the twins' care. "These children have been nothing but trouble," Cross complained, spreading papers across the table. "Food, clothing, medical expenses, not to mention the time and effort. The boy has a learning disability, and the girl won't stop asking questions about everything. I've done the county a favor taking them in, and now I deserve compensation." Jake studied the receipts, noting generic items like food costs and miscellaneous expenses without specific details. The medical expenses appeared to be for basic checkups that should have been covered by state insurance. It was clear Cross was inflating the numbers, but Jake also knew the man held all the cards. "Where are the children now?" Jake asked. "Back at my place, where they belong until this matter is settled. They're working in the fields today," builds character and work ethic. "Too many kids these days don't understand the value of hard work." Sheriff Bradley's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Jake could see the frustration in his friend's eyes, knowing that without concrete evidence of abuse, Cross couldn't be stopped through official channels. "I'll pay what you're asking," Jake said quietly, "but I want to see the children first." Cross's eyes lit up with greed. "That can be arranged, but I want cash, and I want it today. These kids are eating me out of house and home." The drive to Cross's property took them 12 miles outside of Cedar Ridge, down a winding dirt road that led to a cluster of run-down buildings surrounded by neglected fields. The main house was a sagging 2-story structure with peeling paint and broken shutters. Behind it stood a large barn that had been converted into makeshift living quarters, with small windows cut into the walls and a single door. As they approached the barn, Jake could hear children's voices coming from inside. Cross banged on the door with his fist. "You kids get out here. We've got visitors." The door opened slowly and 6 children emerged, ranging in age from about 6 to 12. They were dirty and thin, wearing clothes that were too small and torn in places, but it was the twins who caught Jake's attention immediately. Marcus and Maya stood close together, the boy's protective arm around his sister's shoulders. They had the same dark hair and deep brown eyes, but where Marcus appeared withdrawn and fearful, Maya looked directly at Jake with a mixture of curiosity and defiance. "These are the troublemakers," Cross said, pointing at the twins. "Marcus here can barely read, and Maya never stops asking questions, always wanting to know why this, why that. Drives me crazy." Jake knelt down to the children's eye level. "Hi there, I'm Jake Morrison. What are your names?" Marcus remained silent, but Maya stepped forward slightly. "I'm Maya, and this is my brother Marcus. Are you here to take us away from Mr. Cross?" The hope in her voice was heartbreaking. Jake glanced at the other children, who watched the interaction with the wariness of those who had learned not to expect good things from adults. "We'll see," Jake said gently. "Can you tell me about yourselves? What do you like to do?" Maya's eyes brightened for the first time. "I like to read, but we don't have any books here. Marcus is really good at taking care of animals. He helped our dad on our farm before—" Her voice trailed off. "Before the accident," Marcus finished quietly, speaking for the first time. Jake felt something crack inside his chest. These children had lost their parents, their home, and their childhood, all in the span of 6 months. They had been reduced to unpaid laborers, living in conditions that would be unacceptable for livestock. "That's enough visiting," Cross interrupted. "You kids get back to work. Those potatoes won't harvest themselves." As the children trudged toward the fields, Jake made his decision. He turned to Cross and pulled out the envelope containing every dollar he had managed to scrape together. "Here's your money, but I want those twins, and I want them today." Cross counted the bills twice, his greedy fingers lingering on each one. "Pleasure doing business with you, but I'm warning you, those kids are nothing but trouble. The boy's got problems in his head, and the girl's too smart for her own good. You'll regret this." "I'll take my chances," Jake replied. An hour later, Jake found himself driving back towards Cedar Ridge with 2 frightened children in his truck. Their few possessions fit in a single garbage bag, some torn clothes, a broken toy truck that had belonged to Marcus, and a worn picture book that Maya clutched to her chest. The silence in the truck was heavy as they drove through the Montana countryside. Jake glanced in the rearview mirror at the twins, who sat pressed together in the back seat, watching the landscape pass by with uncertain eyes. "Are you going to make us work in your fields too?" Maya finally asked, her voice small but direct. Jake pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to face them. "Listen to me, both of you. I don't have any fields for you to work in. I'm a rancher, but I don't have any cattle left. What I do have is a house that's been too quiet for and too long, and a promise I made to my wife before she died. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The children stared at him with wide eyes. "I promised her that if we ever got the chance to help kids who needed a home, we would. She was a teacher, and she loved children more than anything in this world. I can't bring her back, but I can keep that promise." Maya's grip on her book loosened slightly. "What happened to your wife?" "She got sick and went to heaven, but before she left, she made me promise to always do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Marcus spoke up for the second time that day. "Our mom and dad went to heaven too, in a car accident." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of their shared loss. "Then we understand each other. We've all lost people we love, but that doesn't mean we have to be alone." As they drove the remaining miles to the ranch, Jake began to tell them about the property, about the creek that would run again when the rains returned, about the horses he hoped to buy someday, and about the school in town where Maya could read all the books she wanted and Marcus could learn at his own pace. For the first time since their parents' death, the twins began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had found their way home. The first night at the Morrison Ranch was unlike anything Marcus and Maya had experienced in months. Jake led them through the front door of the farmhouse, their footsteps echoing in the spacious rooms that had been silent for too long. The house still bore traces of Sarah's presence, her reading glasses on the kitchen counter, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, and family photographs lining the hallway walls. "This was my wife's favorite room," Jake said, opening the door to what had been Sarah's study, Built-in bookshelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling, filled with hundreds of books on every subject imaginable. Maya's eyes widened as she took in the sight, her hand instinctively reaching for her worn picture book. "She can really read all of these," Maya whispered, as if speaking too loudly might make the books disappear. "She was the smartest person I ever knew," Jake replied. "She always said books were windows to other worlds. I think she'd want you to explore every one of them." While Maya gravitated toward the books, Marcus wandered to the large window that overlooked the empty pastures. In the distance, he could see the outline of the barn and several outbuildings that had once housed Jake's cattle operation. "Where are all your cows?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying the practical curiosity of a child who had grown up on a farm. Jake joined him at the window, looking out over the land that had defined his family for generations. "I had to sell them to pay for medicine when Sarah was sick, and then more when the drought came. Sometimes life makes you choose between what you want and what you need to do." That evening, Jake prepared the first real meal the twins had eaten in months. He wasn't much of a cook. Sarah had handled most of the kitchen duties, but he managed to put together grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from cans he found in the pantry. The children ate slowly, as if still unsure whether the food would be taken away from them. "Tomorrow we'll go into town and get you some proper clothes," Jake said, noticing how the twins' current outfits hung loosely on their thin frames. "And we'll need to get you enrolled in school." Maya looked up from her soup. "Will the other kids be mean to us? Some might be curious about where you came from, but most of the kids in Cedar Ridge are good people. Their parents raised them." "Right." Jake paused, choosing his words carefully. "You've been through things that most children never have to face. That makes you stronger than you know, but it also means you might need time to trust people again. That's okay. Later that night, Jake made up beds in the 2 spare rooms upstairs. The twins had never slept in separate rooms before, and Maya appeared at Marcus's doorway within minutes of being tucked in. "Can I sleep in here tonight?" she asked, clutching her picture book. Marcus scooted over without hesitation, and Maya climbed into the twin bed beside her brother. Jake found them there the next morning, curled up together like 2 small animals seeking warmth and comfort in an uncertain world. The trip to town that morning proved to be more challenging than Jake had anticipated. Cedar Ridge was the kind of small community where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the sight of Jake Morrison with 2 unfamiliar children sparked immediate curiosity and whispered conversations. At Miller's general store, Jake helped the twins pick out new clothes while enduring pointed questions from other customers. Betty Miller, the store owner, was more direct than most. "Those the kids from Vernon Cross's place?" she asked, ringing up 2 pairs of jeans and several shirts. "Heard through the grapevine that you paid him quite a sum to take them off his hands." Jake's jaw tightened. "These children needed a home. I had room to spare." "That's mighty Christian of you, Jake. But are you sure you thought this through? Raising kids is expensive, and everyone knows you're having money troubles." The twins stood nearby, trying on shoes and pretending not to listen, but Jake could see the tension in their shoulders. They had heard these kinds of conversations before, adults discussing their worth and their future as if they were livestock at auction. "Some things are more important than money," Jake replied firmly, loud enough for the children to hear. "These kids aren't a burden, they're a blessing." Their next stop was the elementary school, where Jake hoped to enroll the twins immediately. Principal Dorothy Hawkins was a woman in her 60s who had known Sarah personally and had attended her funeral the previous winter. "Jake Morrison, what a surprise," she said, her eyes immediately focusing on Marcus and Maya. "And who might these young people be?" Jake explained the situation briefly, omitting the more disturbing details about Vernon Cross's operation. Principal Hawkins listened carefully, occasionally glancing at the children who sat quietly in the chairs beside. "You Jakes, We'll need to assess their academic levels, she said. Children who have been displaced sometimes fall behind in their studies. Maya spoke up for the first time since entering the building. I can read chapter books, and I know my multiplication tables up to 12. Marcus is really good with numbers, but reading is harder for him because the letters sometimes look backward. Principal Hawkins raised an eyebrow. Is that so? Marcus, would you like to tell me about the numbers you enjoy working with? Marcus, who had remained silent throughout the morning, looked up shyly. I like figuring out how much feed animals need, and how much it costs, and how long it takes for baby animals to grow up. My dad taught me before he died. These children have been through assessments before, Jake said quietly. They just need a chance to learn in a place where they feel safe. Principal Hawkins studied the twins for a long moment, then made her decision. We'll start them in the appropriate grade levels and adjust as needed. Maya, you'll be with Mrs. Peterson in 3rd grade, and Marcus, you'll be with Mr. Chen in 3rd grade as well. He has experience working with children who have learning differences. As they left the school, Maya tugged on Jake's sleeve. Are we really going to stay here, or will you send us away when we cause trouble? Jake stopped walking and knelt down to her level. Maya, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You and Marcus are not temporary guests. You're not here until someone better comes along. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be. But what if we're too much work? What if we cost too much money? The question revealed the deep insecurity that had been planted in these children by months of being treated as burdens rather than blessings. Jake realized that winning their trust would take much more than providing food and shelter. Do you remember what I told you about my wife, Sarah? He asked. Both children nodded. What do you mean? I mean that before you and Maya came here, I was rich in land and cattle, but I was poor in the things that really matter. Now I'm rich in the things that matter most, even if my bank account is empty. Maya, who had been reading nearby, looked up from her book. But what happens if we can't afford to live here anymore? Will the bank take the house away? Jake realized he couldn't continue hiding the truth from children who were already too familiar with loss and uncertainty. That's possible, yes. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. That's what families do. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle coming up the long driveway. Sheriff Bradley's patrol car pulled up to the house, but instead of the serious expression Jake expected, Tom was smiling broadly. Jake, you need to come with me to town. There's something happening at the courthouse that you need to see. What kind of something? The kind that might just solve some of your problems. Trust me on this one. Jake looked at the twins, who were watching the exchange with curious eyes. Can the kids come too? They absolutely should come. This involves them as much as it involves you. The drive to Cedar Ridge took them through the center of town, where Jake noticed an unusual number of cars parked around the courthouse square. People were gathered in small groups, talking animatedly and pointing toward the courthouse steps. Tom, what's going on here? You'll see in a minute. Just park and follow me. As they approached the courthouse, Jake recognized many faces from the community, teachers from the school, members of various churches, local business owners, and ranchers he had known for years. At the center of the crowd stood Principal Hawkins, holding a large manila envelope and wearing a smile that seemed to light up the entire square. "There he is!" someone called out, and suddenly all eyes were on Jake and the twins. Principal Hawkins stepped forward, her voice carrying across the crowd. Jake Morrison, these children, and everyone gathered here today, I have the honor of presenting you with something that represents the very best of our community. She opened the envelope and pulled out a check, holding it high enough for everyone to see. This check represents donations from 127 families and businesses in Whitewater County. The total amount is $43,147, raised over the past 3 months to help support your family and save the Morrison Ranch. Jake stared at the check in disbelief, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The amount was enough to pay off his immediate debts, catch up on the mortgage payments, and provide a cushion for the family's basic needs for at least a year. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did this happen?" Dr. Martinez stepped forward from the crowd. "It started small, Jake. A few of us who knew what you had done for Marcus and Maya began talking about ways to help. We set up a donation box at the medical clinic, and the response was immediate. The teachers at school started a fund drive," added Mrs. Chen from the library. "When Maya won the county-wide essay contest with her story about finding a new family, it got people's attention. Word spread about what you had sacrificed to save those children." Jake looked down at Marcus and Maya, who were staring at the crowd with wide eyes. Maya stepped closer to him and took his hand. "They're helping us because we're a family now," she asked. "They're helping us because this community takes care of its own," Principal Hawkins replied, "and you three have become part of our family." The crowd began to disperse, but individual families and business owners approached Jake throughout the afternoon to shake his hand and share their own stories. Many revealed that they had faced similar struggles and had received help from neighbors during difficult times. Carl Peterson, who owned the local feed store, pulled Jake aside. "My business has been struggling too, but I wanted to contribute something more than just money. I've got a partnership proposal for you." Carl explained that he had been looking for a way to expand his business into organic livestock feed, but he needed a reliable partner who understood ranching and had the land to grow specialty crops. The Morrison Ranch, with its diverse soil, types and reliable water rights, would be perfect for growing the high-quality alfalfa and grain needed for premium animal feed. "I'll provide the seeds, the equipment, and the expertise," Carl offered. "You provide the land and the labor. We split the profits 50-50, and I guarantee you'll make enough to support your family and rebuild your cattle operation within 3 years. Jake felt overwhelmed by the generosity and the opportunities that were suddenly presenting themselves. "Carl, I don't know what to say. This is incredibly generous, but I need to think about whether I can handle the responsibility." "You won't be handling it alone," Carl replied. "I've already talked to 6 other families who want to invest in this operation. We're not just offering you charity, Jake. We're offering you a partnership in something that will benefit the entire community." As the family drove home that evening, the twins chatted excitedly about the day's events, but Jake found himself struggling with conflicting emotions. The financial relief was immense, but he also felt a deep sense of responsibility to prove worthy of the community's investment in his family. "Why do you look worried?" Maya asked from the back seat. "Isn't this good news?" "It's wonderful news," Jake replied, "but it also means we have to work extra hard to show everyone that their faith in us was justified." "We're already working hard," Marcus pointed out. "Maya's the smartest kid in her class, and I'm learning to read better every day. And we help." "You with the ranch work," Jake smiled, realizing that the children understood something he was still learning to accept. They weren't just recipients of charity, they were active participants in their own success story. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of activity as Jake began implementing the partnership with Carl Peterson. The donation money allowed him to catch up on his mortgage payments and utility bills, while the business partnership provided a sustainable path forward for the ranch's future. Marcus threw himself into the agricultural project with enthusiasm that surprised everyone. His mathematical abilities proved invaluable in calculating seed quantities, spacing requirements, and irrigation schedules. More importantly, his natural affinity for working with living things extended to crop management as well as animal care. Maya continued to excel academically, but she also discovered a talent for organization and communication that made her an effective liaison between the ranch operation and the various community partners. She created detailed charts tracking the crop rotation schedules and wrote weekly reports that Carl Peterson shared with the other investors. The twins' success at school became a source of pride for the entire community. Maya's essay about finding a new family had been published in the regional newspaper, bringing positive attention to Cedar Ridge and inspiring similar adoption stories in neighboring counties. Marcus's progress in overcoming his learning challenges encouraged other parents to seek help for their children who faced similar difficulties. As spring turned to summer, the Morrison Ranch began to show signs of revival. The fields that had been barren for 2 years were now green with growing crops. The barn, which had been empty and silent, buzzed with activity as Jake and Marcus prepared it for the arrival of the first horses they planned to purchase. The transformation wasn't just physical. Jake found himself laughing more often, engaging with neighbors in ways he hadn't since Sarah's death, and planning for a future that extended beyond mere survival. The twins, meanwhile, had grown from frightened, withdrawn children into confident, capable young people who spoke openly about their dreams and goals. But the most significant change was in their relationship as a family. The formal adoption process had been initiated, with the legal paperwork moving smoothly through the courts. Jake had worried that the official adoption might feel different from the emotional bonds they had already formed, but when the judge asked Marcus and Maya if they wanted Jake to be their legal father, their enthusiastic responses brought tears to everyone's eyes. "He's already our dad," Maya had said simply. "This just makes it official." The adoption ceremony took place on a warm day in late June, with many of the same community members who had contributed to the fund drive in attendance. As Jake signed the final papers, he felt Sarah's presence more strongly than he had since her death. He knew she would have been proud of the family they had created and the community support they had received. That evening, as the newly official Morrison family sat on their front porch, watching the sunset over their thriving fields, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months earlier, he had been a broken man, facing the loss of everything his family had built. Now he was the father of 2 remarkable children, a partner in a successful agricultural venture, and a valued member of a community that had rallied around his family in their time of need. "Dad," Marcus said, using the title that still made Jake's heart skip a beat, "do you think Mom Sarah would have liked us?" Jake looked at his son, seeing in his face the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that had characterized both twins when they first arrived at the ranch. "Marcus, I know she would have loved you both exactly as much as I do. She always said that love isn't something you run out of, it's something that grows bigger when you share it." Maya leaned against Jake's shoulder, her book forgotten in her lap. "Are we going to have more adventures together?" "I suspect we are," Jake replied, wrapping his arms around both children. "But whatever comes next, we'll face it together. That's what families do." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jake realized that their story was just beginning. The challenges they had overcome and the bonds they had formed had prepared them for whatever the future might bring. The Morrison Ranch was no longer just a piece of land. It had become the foundation for a family that would make the entire county proud for generations to come. 2 years after the adoption ceremony, the Morrison Ranch had become the talk of Whitewater County for entirely new reasons. What had started as a desperate rancher's act of compassion had evolved into one of the most successful agricultural operations in the region, but more importantly, it had become a symbol of what could be accomplished when a community united behind a common cause. Marcus, now 10 years old, had developed into an exceptional young farmer with an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that impressed even veteran ranchers. His learning differences, once seen as obstacles, had proven to be advantages in certain situations. His methodical approach to problem-solving and his ability to notice patterns that others missed made him invaluable in managing the ranch's expanding livestock operation. Jake had used the profits from their first successful crop harvest to purchase a small herd of heritage breed cattle, specializing in raising grass-fed beef for the growing organic market. Marcus had taken charge of developing a rotational grazing system that maximized the health of both the animals and the pasture land. His innovations had attracted the attention of agricultural extension agents from the state university, who began bringing groups of students to study his methods. Maya, meanwhile, had channeled her academic excellence into practical applications that benefited the entire operation. At age 10, she was already managing the ranch's social media presence, creating engaging content that showcased their sustainable farming practices and attracted customers from across the region. Her writing skills had evolved beyond simple essays to include grant applications that had secured additional funding for educational programs on the ranch. The success of the Morrison Ranch had created a ripple effect throughout Cedar Ridge. Other struggling farmers began adopting similar diversified farming approaches, and the town experienced an economic revival that attracted new businesses and young families. The population, which had been declining for a decade, began to grow again as people heard about the community's commitment to supporting its members. But the most unexpected development came in the form of national attention. Maya's original essay about finding a new family had been republished in several magazines, eventually catching the eye of a documentary filmmaker who was interested in stories about rural American resilience. When filmmaker Rebecca Walsh arrived in Cedar Ridge to explore the possibility of making a documentary about the Morrison family, she discovered a story far more complex and inspiring than she had anticipated. "I came here expecting to film a simple human interest piece about adoption," Rebecca explained to Jake during their initial meeting. "But what you've created here goes far beyond one family's story. You've demonstrated how individual acts of kindness can transform entire communities." The documentary project brought both opportunities and challenges. While the positive attention helped promote the ranch's products and attracted more visitors to their educational programs, it also meant increased scrutiny of their operation and their family life. Some critics questioned whether the Morrisons were being exploited for their story, while others suggested that their success was due more to community charity than to their own efforts. These criticisms stung, particularly when they reached the children's ears through school gossip and social media comments. "Are we famous because Dad rescued us, or because we're actually good at farming?" Marcus asked one evening after a particularly difficult day at school where classmates had teased him about being a charity case who had gotten lucky. Jake sat down with both children at the kitchen table, the same spot where he had made the decision to sell Thunder the Bull 3 years earlier. "Marcus, Maya, I want you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because it's important that you understand this." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I first brought you home, people did help us, because they felt sorry for our situation. That's true, and there's no shame in accepting help when you need it. But everything that's happened since then, the success of the ranch, the awards you've won at school, the respect you've earned from adults in this community, that's all because of your own hard work and talent." Maya looked up from her homework. "But would any of it have happened if the community hadn't given us that money?" "Maybe not exactly the same way," Jake admitted. "But I'll tell you what I believe with absolute certainty. You too would have found a way to succeed no matter what circumstances you faced. The money helped, but what made the real difference was your determination to build something meaningful with the opportunities you were given. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Jake opened it to find Dr. Martinez standing on the porch, holding an official-looking envelope and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Jake, I hope you're sitting down, because I have news that's going to change everything. For your family." She handed him the envelope, which bore the seal of the governor's office. Inside was a letter announcing that the Morrison family had been selected to receive the Governor's Award for Rural Innovation, recognizing their contributions to sustainable agriculture and community development. "This is the highest honor the state gives to agricultural operations," Dr. Martinez explained. "The award comes with a $50,000 grant for continuing education and expansion of your programs." But the letter contained even more surprising news. The state had decided to designate the Morrison Ranch as an official demonstration site for sustainable farming practices, which would bring regular groups of visitors and provide ongoing funding for educational programs. "There's more," Dr. Martinez continued. "The university wants to offer both Marcus and Maya full scholarships for their future education, starting with a special summer program for gifted students interested in agricultural sciences." As Jake read the letter aloud, he watched the children's faces transform from uncertainty to amazement to pure joy. These weren't handouts based on sympathy. These were recognition of genuine achievements that the children had earned through their own efforts. The Governor's Award ceremony took place at the state capitol, with the Morrison family invited to speak about their experiences and their plans for the future. For Marcus, who had once struggled to read simple sentences, standing at a podium and addressing an audience of state officials and agricultural leaders seemed impossible. But with Maya's encouragement and Jake's support, he delivered a speech about sustainable farming that received a standing ovation. "3 years ago, I couldn't read a book," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Today, I'm reading agricultural research papers and developing new methods for caring for livestock. If someone like me can learn to do these things, then any kid can achieve their dreams if they have the right support." Maya's speech focused on the power of community support and the responsibility that comes with receiving help from others. "We learned that accepting help isn't something to be ashamed of. It's the first step in becoming someone who can help others. Our goal is to use everything we've learned to help other kids who are facing the same challenges we faced." The ceremony marked a turning point in how the Morrison family saw themselves and their place in the world. They were no longer the recipients of charity, but leaders in their field who had something valuable to offer others. The summer program at the university exposed both children to advanced concepts in agricultural science and environmental management. Marcus discovered a passion for veterinary medicine and began working with university researchers on projects related to livestock health and nutrition. Maya developed an interest in agricultural policy and economics, studying how government programs could better support small family farms. When they returned to Cedar Ridge, the children brought with them new ideas and connections that further enhanced the ranch's operations. They also brought a broader perspective on their role in addressing larger social and economic challenges facing rural communities. The documentary, when it finally aired on national television, presented the Morrison family's story as part of a larger narrative about American resilience and innovation. The film highlighted not just their personal triumph, but the way their success had revitalized an entire region. The national exposure brought visitors from around the world to study their farming methods and community development model. Agricultural delegations from developing countries came to learn about sustainable farming techniques. Policymakers visited to understand how rural communities could support struggling families. Educators brought students to see how academic learning could be applied to real-world challenges, With increased visibility came increased responsibility. Jake found himself invited to speak at conferences and serve on advisory committees for agricultural organizations. The children received invitations to participate in youth leadership programs and to share their experiences with other young people facing difficult circumstances. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Vernon Cross, the man who had exploited the twins and other children, was serving a 3-year prison sentence for child endangerment and fraud. From prison, he sent a letter to Jake that arrived on the 4th anniversary of the twins' arrival. At the ranch, the letter was brief and poorly written, but its message was clear. I was wrong about those kids and about you. What you did took more courage than I ever had. I hope someday I can make up for the harm I caused. Jake showed the letter to Marcus and Maya, who read it with the maturity of young people who had learned to forgive without forgetting. Do you think he really means it? Maya asked. I think he's learned something about the consequences of his choices, Jake replied. Whether he truly understands the harm he caused, I can't say. But I hope prison has given him time to think about how he wants to live the rest of his life. Marcus, ever practical in his approach to problems, had a different perspective. Maybe he could help other kids when he gets out. He knows what it's like to make bad choices. That might make him good at helping people learn to make better ones. The suggestion reflected the remarkable capacity for compassion that both children had, developed despite their early traumatic experiences. They had learned to see people not just as they were, but as they could become, with the right support and opportunities. As the Morrison family entered their 5th year together, they faced new challenges and opportunities that would test everything. They had learned about resilience, community, and the power of believing in each other's potential. The ranch had grown from a failing operation to a thriving educational center that employed 12 full-time staff members and hosted thousands of visitors annually. Marcus and Maya, now approaching their teenage years, were beginning to think seriously about their long-term goals and how they wanted to use their experiences to benefit others. The transformation that had begun with one man's desperate decision to help 2 orphaned children had evolved into something far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The Morrison Ranch had become proof that with enough determination, community support, and willingness to work hard, even the most challenging circumstances could be transformed into opportunities for extraordinary success. But the real measure of their achievement wasn't found in awards or recognition or financial success. It was found in the quiet moments when Jake watched his children work together to solve problems, when he saw them treat newcomers to their community with the same kindness they had once desperately needed, and when he realized that Sarah's dream of creating a family dedicated to helping others had been fulfilled in ways she never could have imagined. The story that had begun with tears of desperation had become a legacy of hope that would inspire the entire county for generations to come. The summer Marcus and Maya turned 12 marked a pivotal moment that would test everything the Morrison family had built together. What started as an ordinary Tuesday morning would become the day that revealed the true depth of their transformation and the unbreakable bonds they had forged through years of shared challenges and triumphs. Jake was in the barn checking on their prize Angus bull, Thunder's Legacy, named in honor of the bull he had sold to bring the twins home, when he noticed something was wrong. The animal was favoring his left rear leg and showing signs of distress that Jake's experienced eye immediately recognized as serious. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, the large animal veterinarian who had become a regular consultant for the ranch's livestock program, arrived within an hour of Jake's call. Her examination revealed a severe hoof infection that had spread into the surrounding tissue, threatening not only Thunder's legacy, but potentially the entire herd if the bacterial infection proved contagious. This is going to require immediate surgery and at least 6 weeks of intensive treatment, Dr. Holbrook explained, her expression grave. The medical costs alone will be substantial, but more concerning is the possibility that we might need to quarantine your entire herd. If this infection spreads, you could lose everything you've rebuilt. The financial implications were staggering. The ranch's insurance would cover some of the veterinary costs, but a prolonged quarantine would mean cancelled contracts, lost revenue from educational programs, and the possibility of having to destroy infected animals. Jake felt the familiar knot of anxiety in his stomach that he hadn't experienced since the early days of their financial struggles. Marcus had been quietly listening to the conversation from the barn entrance, and Jake noticed his son's face had gone pale. The boy understood better than most what the potential loss of their livestock would mean for the family's future. "Dad, can I talk to Dr. Holbrook about Thunder's legacy?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite his obvious concern. Dr. Holbrook had worked with Marcus on several occasions and respected his unusual insight into animal behavior and health. "Of course, Marcus. What are you thinking?" "I've been watching him for the past 3 days, and I noticed he was avoiding putting weight on that leg, but only when he thought humans were watching. When he didn't know I was there, he moved more. Normally. Also, he's been lying down in a specific spot in the pasture that's always muddy after the irrigation runs." Dr. Holbrook's eyebrows rose with interest. "Show me exactly where he's been lying." Marcus led them to a low area of the pasture where runoff from the irrigation system created a consistently damp, muddy patch. The veterinarian knelt down and examined the soil, then took samples in small containers she produced from her medical bag. "Marcus, this observation could be crucial. If he's been seeking out this particular type of mud, there might be natural minerals or clay content that's been providing some relief. You might have just given us important information about treatment options." Over the next several hours, Dr. Holbrook conducted a comprehensive examination of not just Thunder's legacy, but the entire herd, the pasture conditions, and even the water sources. Marcus accompanied her throughout the process, asking detailed questions and offering observations that demonstrated his sophisticated understanding of the interconnected systems that affected animal health. Maya, meanwhile, had taken charge of managing the crisis from a communications and logistics standpoint. She created detailed schedules for the medical treatments, contacted the families and schools that had scheduled visits to inform them of the temporary restrictions, and began researching alternative revenue sources that could help offset the financial impact of the quarantine. "I've been looking at our social media analytics," Maya told Jake that evening, spreading printouts across the kitchen table. "Our educational videos have been getting huge engagement, especially the ones where Marcus explains animal care techniques. I think we could create a premium online course series that would generate income even while we can't have visitors on the ranch." The next few weeks tested every skill the family had developed over their years together. Jake managed the complex medical protocols required to treat Thunder's legacy and monitor the rest of the herd. Marcus became Dr. Holbrook's unofficial assistant, learning advanced veterinary techniques and developing treatment innovations that impressed the seasoned professional. Maya transformed their temporary setback into an opportunity for expansion, creating digital content that reached audiences far beyond what their physical programs had ever achieved. Her online courses attracted participants from agricultural communities across the country, generating revenue that more than compensated for the lost visitor income. But the real test came when Dr. Holbrook delivered unexpected news after 2 weeks of intensive treatment. The infection is responding well to treatment, and we've seen no signs of spread to other animals, she announced. But I've discovered something else through the soil analysis that Marcus suggested. This ranch has some of the most mineral-rich soil I've ever encountered, with natural antimicrobial properties that likely prevented a much worse outbreak. She paused, looking at both children before continuing. Marcus, your observations about Thunder's legacy seeking out that muddy area led us to discover that he was essentially self-medicating. The clay in that soil contains natural compounds that were helping to control the infection. This isn't just good news for your current situation. It represents a potential breakthrough in natural livestock health management. Dr. Holbrook proposed a partnership that would transform the ranch. Once again, the University Veterinary School wanted to establish a research facility at the Morrison Ranch to study the natural healing properties of their soil and develop new treatments based on traditional animal behaviors. This could revolutionize how we approach livestock healthcare, she explained. Instead of relying solely on pharmaceutical interventions, we could develop protocols that work with animals' natural instincts and environmental resources. The research partnership brought new opportunities and new responsibilities. Graduate students began arriving to conduct studies on the ranch, and Marcus found himself collaborating with doctoral candidates on research projects that would have been unimaginable for someone his age just a few years earlier. Maya expanded, her role as well, managing the complex logistics of coordinating research activities with educational programs and ranch operations. Her organizational skills and communication abilities made her an invaluable liaison between the various groups working on the property. The transformation of the Morrison Ranch into a legitimate research facility attracted international attention. Agricultural scientists from universities around the world began requesting visits to study their innovative approaches to sustainable farming and natural animal health care. Jake found himself in the unexpected position of being recognized as a pioneer in integrated agricultural systems. Speaking invitations poured in from conferences and symposiums, and agricultural publications regularly featured articles about the ranch's groundbreaking work. But the achievement that meant the most to Jake came in the form of a letter from the Department of Agriculture, offering him a position as a special advisor on rural development and sustainable farming practices. The position would involve traveling to rural communities across the country to help other struggling farmers develop successful operations based on the Morrison Ranch model. They want me to spend half my time here and half my time traveling to help other farming families, Jake explained to Marcus and Maya as they sat on the front porch after dinner. It would mean good money and the chance to help people in situations like ours used to be. Maya looked up from the tablet where she was reviewing online course enrollment numbers. Would we come with you sometimes? That's entirely up to you. 2. The position is structured so that I could bring you along when it makes sense, especially for educational demonstrations, but it would also mean more time apart from the ranch. Marcus, who had been quietly thinking, finally spoke up. Dad, remember what you told us about how the best things in life aren't easy? I think helping other families might be one of those best things. The decision to accept the advisory position marked another evolution in the Morrison family's journey. Jake began traveling to rural communities throughout the region, bringing with him not just agricultural expertise, but the living example of what could be accomplished when a community rallied around families in need. Marcus and Maya often accompanied him on these trips, sharing their experiences with other children who were facing challenges similar to those they had overcome. Their presentations to youth groups and school assemblies became some of the most requested programs in the Department of Agriculture's outreach efforts. The impact of their work extended far beyond individual farming operations. Communities that implemented the Morrison Ranch model began experiencing economic revitalization, similar to what had occurred in Cedar Ridge. Rural schools reported improved academic performance among students who participated in agricultural education programs based on Marcus and Maya's methods. Policymakers began citing the Morrison family's story as evidence for the effectiveness of community-based support systems for struggling families. Their success became a template for legislation aimed at strengthening rural communities through integrated approaches to economic development and social services. As Marcus and Maya entered their teenage years, they began to articulate their own visions for how they wanted to use their experiences to benefit others. Marcus expressed interest in veterinary medicine with a focus on developing natural treatment methods that could be accessible to farmers in developing countries. Maya planned to study agricultural economics and policy with the goal of creating systems that could replicate their community's success on a larger scale. The ranch itself had evolved into something far beyond what anyone had imagined when Jake first brought two frightened children home 5 years earlier. It was now a thriving research facility, educational center, and demonstration site that employed over 30 people and generated revenue from multiple sources. But more importantly, it had become a symbol of hope for rural communities across the country. The Morrison family's story proved that with determination, community support, and willingness to innovate, even the most challenging circumstances could be transformed into opportunities for extraordinary success. The lessons they had learned about resilience, compassion, and the power of believing in each other's potential had created a legacy that would continue to inspire and benefit others for generations to come. What had begun as one man's desperate attempt to save two orphaned children had become a movement that was transforming how America thought about rural development, community support, and the potential that exists within every struggling family. The greatest testament to their success wasn't found in awards or recognition, but in the hundreds of families across the country who had been helped by programs modeled on the Morrison Ranch approach. Each success story represented proof that the principles Jake, Marcus, and Maya had lived by, that love grows when shared, that challenges become opportunities with the right support, and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to give up on each other, could indeed change the world, one family at a time. The letter arrived on a rain-soaked morning in early March. 7 years after Jake had first brought Marcus and Maya home to the Morrison Ranch. Maya, now 14 and preparing for her freshman year of high school, was sorting through the mail when she noticed the distinctive letterhead of the White House Office of Public Engagement. "Dad, there's something here you need to see immediately," she called, her voice carrying an unusual mixture of excitement and disbelief. Jake set down his coffee and took the envelope, noting the official seals and formal addressing. Inside was an invitation that would change their lives once again, but in ways that would test their family bonds more severely than any challenge they had previously faced. The President of the United States was hosting a national summit on rural economic development, and the Morrison family had been selected as the featured speakers representing successful community-based agricultural innovation. The event would bring together policymakers, agricultural leaders, and media representatives from around the world to develop new strategies for supporting struggling rural communities. "They want us to speak to Congress," Marcus said, reading over Jake's shoulder. At 15, he had grown into a young man whose quiet confidence and deep knowledge of sustainable farming practices had already earned him respect among agricultural professionals twice his age. "Not just Congress," Maya corrected, scanning the detailed itinerary. "This is a 3-day summit with representatives from 12 countries." They want us to present our community development model as a potential template for international rural aid programs. Jake felt the familiar mix of pride and responsibility that had characterized so much of their journey together. The recognition was extraordinary, but it also meant stepping into a level of public scrutiny and political complexity that would challenge everything they had learned about balancing their private family life with their public mission. The preparations for the summit consumed the following 6 weeks. Maya took charge of creating presentation materials that could effectively communicate their story to an international audience, while Marcus worked with university researchers to compile data demonstrating the measurable impacts of their agricultural innovations. Jake found himself grappling with the broader implications of their growing influence. Representatives from major agricultural corporations had begun reaching out with partnership offers that could bring substantial financial benefits to the ranch. Publishing companies wanted to negotiate book deals. Hollywood agents had called about potential movie rights to their story. "We're at a crossroads," Jake explained to the twins during one of their evening planning sessions. "Every opportunity we accept changes who we are and how we can help people. We need to be very careful about staying true to the principles that got us here." The complexity of their situation became clear when they received competing invitations from political organizations with vastly different approaches to rural development policy. Conservative groups wanted to showcase their story as proof that private charity and individual responsibility could solve social problems without government intervention. Progressive organizations saw their success as evidence that strategic, public investment in rural communities could generate extraordinary returns. "Why can't we just tell our story without it becoming political?" Marcus asked, frustrated by the attempts to claim their experience for various ideological purposes. "Because once your story becomes big enough, people want to use it to support their own agendas," Jake replied. "Our job is to stay focused on the truth of what happened and let people draw their own conclusions." The summit itself proved to be even more intense than they had anticipated. The Morrison family found themselves at the center of a media circus that included television interviews, newspaper profiles, and social media coverage that reached millions of people around the world. Maya handled the media attention with remarkable poise, speaking eloquently about the importance of education and community support in helping children overcome adversity. Her interviews with national news outlets demonstrated a sophistication and wisdom that impressed even seasoned journalists. Marcus, despite his natural shyness, proved to be an effective advocate for sustainable farming practices and natural resource conservation. His technical presentations to agricultural officials were so detailed and innovative that several universities offered him immediate admission to their graduate programs, despite his age. But it was Jake's keynote address to the full summit assembly that captured the essence of their journey and its broader significance. Standing before an audience that included cabinet members, foreign dignitaries, and leaders of major international organizations, he spoke not as an expert or policy advocate, but as a father who had learned the transformative power of believing in people's potential. 7 years ago, I was a failed rancher who made a desperate decision to help 2 children who needed a home, Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. "I thought I was rescuing them, but what I discovered is that they rescued me, and together we rescued our entire community," he continued, describing how their experience had taught him that sustainable solutions to rural poverty and social problems couldn't be imposed from outside, but had to grow from within communities that were willing to invest in their most vulnerable members. "The secret isn't the farming techniques we developed or the business partnerships we created," Jake explained. The secret is what happens when a community decides that no one gets left behind, and when people who have been helped become determined to help others. The response to Jake's speech was immediate and overwhelming. Representatives from developing countries approached with requests for technical assistance. Philanthropic organizations offered funding for expansion of their educational programs. Academic institutions proposed research collaborations that could extend their impact globally. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, the veterinarian who had become such an important partner in their research work, approached them after the final session with news that would create their greatest opportunity yet. "I've been talking with colleagues from the International Agricultural Development Foundation," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "They want to fund a comprehensive program that would establish Morrison Ranch-style operations in 20 rural communities across 5 different countries. The initial funding would be $50 million over 10 years. The proposal was staggering in its scope and potential impact. The program would provide comprehensive support for struggling farming families, including financial assistance, technical training, educational resources, and long-term mentorship. The Morrison Ranch would serve as the headquarters and training center, with Marcus and Maya playing key roles in developing curricula and training future program leaders. "This could help thousands of families," Maya said, studying the preliminary program outline. "But it would also mean our ranch becomes something completely different. We'd be running an international organization instead of a family farm." Marcus had a more immediate concern. "What about school? What about having a normal teenage life? We'd be traveling constantly and dealing with reporters and officials all the time." Jake recognized the weight of the decision they faced. Accepting the international program would fulfill their desire to help others on the largest possible scale. But it would also fundamentally change their family dynamic and the children's opportunity to have typical adolescent experiences. "We don't have to decide immediately," Jake said, "but we do need to think carefully about what we really want our lives to look like and what price we're willing to pay for the chance to help more people." The flight home to Montana gave them time to process the overwhelming experiences of the summit and begin discussing the choices ahead of them. As their plane descended toward the familiar landscape of wheat fields and cattle ranches, all 3 family members felt the pull of the simpler life they had built together. The ranch looked different to them now, viewed through the lens of their expanded understanding of its significance. The buildings and fields that had once represented their personal salvation were now seen by the outside world as a model for international development. The quiet family life they cherished had become a public commodity that people wanted to study, replicate, and sometimes exploit. "I want to help people," Maya said as they drove up the familiar gravel road to their house. "But I also want to still be your daughter, not just a spokesperson for rural development." "I want to keep learning about farming and animals," Marcus added. "But I don't want every decision we make to be about politics and public relations." Jake understood exactly what they meant. The success that had grown from their love for each other and their commitment to their community had created opportunities that could potentially consume the very relationships and values that had made their success possible. That evening, as they sat on their front porch watching the sunset over the fields that had witnessed their transformation, Jake made a decision that would define the next phase of their journey together. "Here's what I propose," he said, looking at both children. "We accept the international program, but we do it on our terms. We help design the training materials and visit participating communities, but we maintain this ranch as our home base and preserve time for our family life. We use our influence to help others, but we don't let that influence change who we are at our core." Maya smiled for the first time since they had left Washington. "You mean we stay the Morrison family first, and international agricultural consultants second?" "Exactly," Jake replied. "We've learned that the most important thing we have to offer people isn't our expertise. It's our example of what's possible when families refuse to give up on each other. We can't provide that example if we sacrifice our own family relationships for our public mission." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "So we help other families build what we've built, but we protect what we've built at the same time." "That's the idea," Jake confirmed. "We've got something precious here, something that took us years to create. Our job is to share it with others without losing it ourselves." As they made plans for the international program, the Morrison family established principles that would guide all their future decisions. They would limit their travel to ensure adequate time at home. They would maintain their educational and research activities at the ranch while expanding to support similar operations. Elsewhere, most importantly, they would never accept any opportunity that required them to compromise the family relationships that had made everything else possible. The announcement of their participation in the International Development Program generated massive media attention, but this time the family was prepared with clear boundaries about their privacy and their priorities. Their story continued to inspire people around the world, but it remained fundamentally their story, the story of a struggling rancher who chose love over fear, and two orphan children who chose hope over despair, and a community that chose to believe in the power of helping others as the path to helping themselves. The morning Jake received the call that would change everything came 18 months after they had launched the International Rural Family Development Program. Maya was preparing for her junior year of high school, having skipped a grade due to her exceptional academic performance, while Marcus was working on his Eagle Scout project, a comprehensive water conservation system for the ranch that had attracted attention from environmental engineering firms across the country. The call came from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the program director who had been coordinating their international expansion efforts. Her voice carried an urgency that immediately caught Jake's attention. "Jake, we have a situation in Guatemala that requires immediate intervention. The community we've been working with in San Pedro has been devastated by flooding, and the local family we trained to run the program has lost everything. 3 children have been orphaned, and the entire agricultural infrastructure has been destroyed." Jake felt his stomach tighten as Dr. Rodriguez continued. "The International Foundation wants to send in a rapid response team, but the community leaders are specifically asking for you and the twins. They've heard about your story, and they believe that only people who have personally experienced loss and recovery can help them rebuild." The request presented both an opportunity and a dilemma that went to the heart of the family's carefully maintained balance between their public mission and private life. Guatemala was experiencing its worst natural disaster in decades, and the Morrison family's expertise could genuinely save lives and restore hope to devastated communities. But Maya was in the middle of preparing college applications, and her acceptance to several prestigious universities depended on maintaining her current academic trajectory. Marcus was at a crucial point in his veterinary preparation program, working with specialists who rarely took on students his age. "How long would we need to be there?" Jake asked, already knowing that the answer would complicate their carefully structured lives. "At least 6 months for the initial reconstruction phase, possibly longer depending on the scope of the damage. This isn't just about rebuilding one operation. We're talking about creating a disaster recovery model that could be replicated in other crisis situations." That evening, the Morrison family gathered in their kitchen for a conversation that would test every principle they had established about family priorities and community responsibility. The magnitude of the crisis in Guatemala weighed heavily on all of them, but so did the personal costs of such an extensive commitment. I keep thinking about what our lives were like before we found each other, Maya said, staring at the satellite, photos of the flood damage that Dr. Rodriguez had sent. These families are experiencing that same kind of desperation we felt. How can we not help them if we have the ability to make a difference? Marcus nodded slowly. But we also promised each other that we wouldn't let the mission destroy the family. If we go to Guatemala for 6 months, everything changes. Maya might miss her senior year, I'd have to postpone my college preparation, and we'd be starting all over again in a place where we don't know the language or the culture. Jake studied both of his children, marveling at their maturity and their ability to grapple with complex ethical questions that would challenge adults twice their age. At 17 and 16 respectively, they had already accomplished more than most people achieve in a lifetime, but they were still teenagers who deserved the opportunity to make choices about their own futures. What if we approach this differently? Jake suggested. What if we treat this as an opportunity to test whether our model can work in the most challenging circumstances possible? We could spend the next month developing a comprehensive plan that would allow us to help without abandoning everything we've built here. Over the following weeks, the Morrison family developed an innovative approach to the Guatemala crisis that would revolutionize international disaster response. Instead of relocating entirely, they would establish a rotating presence in Guatemala, with family members spending alternate months in country while maintaining their commitments at home. Maya would complete her senior year through an accelerated online program that would allow her to graduate early and begin college coursework while participating in the Guatemala project. Marcus would document the entire reconstruction process as part of an independent study program that would fulfill his remaining high school requirements while providing real-world experience in agricultural recovery systems. Most importantly, they would bring 3 Guatemalan teenagers to Montana for intensive training, creating a cultural exchange that would ensure the sustainability of the recovery program while exposing the local community to international perspectives on rural development. The first phase of the Guatemala deployment began in January, with Jake and Marcus making the initial assessment trip while Maya remained in Montana to coordinate logistics and continue her studies. What they found in San Pedro exceeded even their worst expectations. The flooding had destroyed not only crops and livestock, but also the social infrastructure that held the community together. Families had been separated, children had lost parents, and the economic foundations that supported the region had been completely wiped out. The 3 orphaned children that Dr. Rodriguez had mentioned were living in a makeshift shelter with an elderly grandmother who was struggling to provide basic necessities. This isn't just agricultural reconstruction, Marcus observed as they surveyed the devastated landscape. This is about rebuilding an entire way of life. The children, 12-year-old Carlos, 10-year-old Isabella, and 8-year-old Miguel, reminded Jake powerfully of Marcus and Maya during their early days at the ranch. They displayed the same mixture of resilience and vulnerability, the same fierce protectiveness toward each other, and the same desperate hope that someone might believe in their potential. Carlos, the eldest, had taken responsibility for his younger siblings with a determination that impressed even the relief workers. Isabella showed remarkable intelligence and curiosity despite the trauma she had experienced. Miguel, though the youngest, demonstrated an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that rivaled Marcus's abilities at the same age. They need more than just emergency assistance, Jake told Dr. Rodriguez during their planning meetings. They need what Marcus and Maya needed, someone who believes they can overcome their circumstances and achieve something extraordinary. The decision to invite the 3 Guatemalan children to spend 6 months at the Morrison Ranch while their community was rebuilt was controversial among international aid organizations. Traditional disaster response protocols emphasized keeping displaced children in familiar cultural environments, not transporting them to different countries. But Jake argued that the children's situation required exceptional measures. "These kids don't just need shelter and food," he explained to the foundation board during a heated video conference. "They need to see that recovery is possible, that loss doesn't have to define their future, and that they have the potential to become leaders in their community's reconstruction." Maya supported the proposal with a detailed presentation about the educational and cultural benefits of the exchange program. Carlos, Isabella, and Miguel aren't just victims of a natural disaster, she argued. They're potential leaders who could transform how their entire region approaches agricultural sustainability and community resilience. But they need intensive training and mentorship that can only happen in a stable environment. Marcus added, his perspective based on his direct observations in Guatemala. These children have already shown leadership qualities that their community recognizes and respects. If we can help them develop those qualities further, they'll return home with the knowledge and confidence to lead the reconstruction effort themselves. The Foundation ultimately approved the exchange program, but with strict conditions and oversight that required extensive documentation and regular progress assessments. The Morrison family would be responsible not only for the children's safety and well-being, but also for ensuring that their experience would translate into measurable benefits for the Guatemala Recovery Project. The arrival of Carlos, Isabella, and Miguel at the Morrison Ranch in March marked the beginning of an intensive 6-month period that would test every assumption the family had developed about their capacity to help others. The Guatemalan children spoke limited English, had never experienced technology beyond basic radio communications, and came from agricultural traditions that differed significantly from Montana ranching practices. But they also brought perspectives and knowledge that enriched the Morrison family's understanding of sustainable farming and community development. Isabella's knowledge of traditional water conservation techniques helped Marcus improve the ranch's irrigation efficiency. Carlos's understanding of crop rotation in tropical climates provided insights that enhanced their research partnerships with university agricultural programs. Miguel, despite his young age, demonstrated an ability to calm distressed animals that amazed even Dr. Holbrook. His techniques, learned from his grandfather before the flood, complemented the ranch's natural healing approaches in ways that generated new research opportunities. The cultural exchange worked both ways, with Maya and Marcus learning Spanish while teaching English, and all 5 teenagers collaborating on projects that combined traditional knowledge with modern technology. The ranch became a laboratory for testing whether sustainable development principles could bridge cultural and linguistic differences. The academic challenges were substantial, but they created learning opportunities that no traditional classroom could have provided. Maya developed fluency in Spanish, while helping Isabella and Carlos navigate American educational systems. Marcus created bilingual technical manuals that would be used in reconstruction efforts throughout Central America. Most importantly, the presence of the Guatemalan children reminded the Morrison family of their own journey and the transformation that was possible when young people were given genuine opportunities to develop their potential. Carlos's determination to master complex agricultural techniques, Isabella's voracious appetite for learning about environmental science, and Miguel's intuitive gift for working with animals reflected the same qualities that had driven Marcus and Maya's success. As the 6-month exchange period progressed, it became clear that the program was achieving results beyond anyone's expectations. The Guatemalan children weren't just learning agricultural techniques, they were developing leadership skills, technological literacy, and international perspectives that would make them uniquely qualified to lead their communities' long-term development. But the true measure of the program's success came in the form of reports from San Pedro, where community members had begun implementing reconstruction techniques based on videos and instructions sent by the children. Crop yields were exceeding pre-flood levels, new water management systems were providing drought resistance, and families that had been considering permanent relocation were choosing to stay and rebuild. What we're seeing isn't just recovery. Dr. Rodriguez reported during a mid-program assessment, "We're seeing transformation. The community is rebuilding in ways that will make it more resilient and prosperous than it was before the disaster." The success in Guatemala attracted international attention that brought both opportunities and challenges. The United Nations requested a comprehensive report on the exchange program's methodologies. The World Bank wanted to fund expansion to 20 additional disaster-affected communities. Academic institutions proposed research partnerships that could formalize the Morrison family's approach into replicable development models, but perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The government of Guatemala announced that it was establishing the Morrison-Rodriguez Institute for Rural Resilience, a permanent facility that would train community leaders from across Latin America in sustainable development and disaster recovery techniques. "Your family's story has become our story," President Martinez told Jake during a ceremony at the Guatemalan embassy in Washington. "You have shown us that recovery from tragedy isn't just about returning to what was, but about building something better than what existed before." As Carlos, Isabella, and Miguel prepared to return to Guatemala with knowledge and skills that would transform their community, the Morrison family reflected on how their own understanding of their mission had evolved. They had started by trying to save 2 orphaned children and had ended up creating a model for international development that was changing lives across multiple continents. But the core of their success remained unchanged. The belief that every person has the potential to overcome their circumstances and contribute something meaningful to their community, and that the most powerful way to help others is to refuse to give up on their capacity for growth and achievement. The story that had begun with one man's desperate decision to help 2 children had become a global movement, but it remained fundamentally a story about the transformative power of family, community, and the unshakable conviction that love and determination can overcome any obstacle. 10 years had passed since Jake Morrison first drove down the dusty road to Vernon Cross's property, with a briefcase full of cash and a heart full of desperation. Now, as he stood before the United Nations General Assembly in New York City, addressing delegates from 193 countries about the global impact of community-based rural development, the magnitude of their journey seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Maya, now 24 and holding dual master's degrees in international development and agricultural economics from Stanford University, sat in the gallery watching her father deliver what many would later call one of the most influential speeches in the history of international aid policy. Beside her, Marcus, 23 and fresh from completing his doctorate in veterinary science with a specialization in natural healing systems, took notes on the delegates' reactions to their father's presentation. The statistics Jake presented were staggering. The Morrison model, as it had become known in development circles, had been implemented in 247 communities across 42 countries. Over 18,000 families had been directly assisted, and more than 75,000 children had benefited from educational programs based on the ranch's integrated approach to community development. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real impact was measured in transformed lives, rebuilt communities, and a fundamental shift in how the international community approached rural poverty and disaster recovery. The secret was never the farming techniques or the business models, Jake told. The assembly, his voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. The secret was understanding that sustainable development happens when communities believe in their own capacity to create change, and when that belief is supported by people who refuse to give up on human potential. In the audience, representatives from major international organizations leaned forward, taking detailed notes. The Morrison model had achieved success rates that far exceeded traditional development programs, with over 85% of participating communities showing sustained economic growth 5 years after program implementation. The speech marked the culmination of a decade that had transformed not only the Morrison family, but the entire field of international development. Their approach, combining immediate crisis intervention with long-term capacity building, integrating traditional knowledge with modern technology, and always prioritizing the development of local leadership, had become the gold standard for rural development programs worldwide. But the path to this moment had not been without challenges that tested every principle the family had established about maintaining their relationships while serving a global mission. 3 years earlier, when Maya was completing her undergraduate studies at Stanford, she had faced a choice that threatened to split the family apart. The World Health Organization had offered her a position as Director of Rural Health Initiative for Sub-Saharan Africa, a role that would have placed her at the forefront of international health policy, but required a 5-year commitment based in Geneva. The offer represented everything Maya had worked toward since her early days of organizing relief efforts from the ranch kitchen. It was the kind of position that could influence the lives of millions of people and establish her as a leader in global health policy. But accepting it would have meant leaving behind the family and community relationships that had shaped her. Understanding of what effective development actually looked like. "I keep thinking about what Dad told us when we were kids," Maya had confided to Marcus during one of their long walks around the ranch property. "He said the most important thing we had to offer wasn't our expertise, but our example of what families can accomplish when they refuse to give up on each other. How can I provide that example if I'm living on another continent?" Marcus, who had faced similar pressures from academic institutions wanting to recruit him for prestigious research positions, understood the dilemma completely. "Maybe the question isn't whether we stay or go," he suggested. "Maybe it's about finding ways to expand our impact while preserving what makes our impact effective." Their solution had been characteristically innovative. Instead of accepting the WHO position as offered, Maya had proposed creating a new kind of international development role, one that would be based at the Morrison Ranch, but would coordinate global health initiatives through the network of communities they had already helped establish. The proposal had required months of negotiations with multiple international organizations, but it eventually resulted in the creation of the Global Rural Resilience Network, with Maya as its founding director and the Morrison Ranch as its headquarters. The network operated on principles that reflected everything the family had learned about sustainable development. Instead of imposing solutions from outside, it identified and supported local leaders who were already working to address their community's challenges. Rather than creating dependency on external funding, it helped communities develop self-sustaining economic systems based on their own resources and traditions. Marcus had taken a similar approach when offered research positions at major universities. Instead of leaving Montana, he had established the Institute for Natural Veterinary Medicine at the ranch, bringing together traditional healing practitioners from around the world with cutting-edge veterinary science to develop treatment approaches that could be implemented in resource-limited settings. The Institute had become a pilgrimage destination for veterinarians, farmers, and traditional healers who wanted to learn integrative approaches to animal health. Its research had led to breakthrough treatments that were now being used in rural communities from Mongolia to Madagascar. But perhaps the most significant development had been the emergence of the next generation of leaders from the communities they had helped. Carlos, Isabella, and Miguel, the three Guatemalan children who had spent 6 months at the ranch, had returned to their homeland and established one of the most successful rural development organizations in Central America. Carlos had become an expert in disaster-resistant agriculture, developing crop varieties that could survive floods, droughts, and other extreme weather events. His techniques were now being taught in agricultural schools throughout Latin America, and his seeds were helping farmers adapt to climate change across the region. Isabella had focused on education and women's empowerment, creating mobile schools that brought literacy and technical training to remote communities. Her programs had educated over 3,000 women and girls, many of whom had gone on to start their own businesses or become community leaders. Miguel, following his early gift for working with animals, had developed innovative approaches to livestock management that combined traditional practices with modern veterinary science. His methods had helped communities recover from disease outbreaks that would have devastated their agricultural systems under conventional approaches. The success of these young leaders had validated the Morrison family's core belief that investing in young people's potential could create ripple effects that extended far beyond individual lives. Each of the former exchange students had trained dozens of other young leaders who in turn had established programs in their own communities. As Jake concluded his speech to the UN General Assembly, he announced the next phase of the Morrison Models Evolution. The Global Rural Resilience Network would be establishing 10 regional training centers around the world, each run by graduates of the original program, and each adapted to the specific cultural and environmental conditions of its region. "We're not expanding to create a larger organization," Jake explained to the delegates. "We're expanding to create more families, more communities that believe in each other's potential and refuse to accept that poverty and suffering are inevitable." The announcement was met with sustained applause, but for Jake, Maya, and Marcus, the real satisfaction came from knowing that their work had evolved beyond anything they could personally control or direct. The principles they had lived by, that love grows when shared, that challenges become opportunities with the right support, and that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things, had taken on a life of their own. After the UN session, the family returned to Montana for what had become an annual tradition, the Founders' Day celebration at the ranch. Former exchange students, community partners, and families who had been helped by Morrison model programs gathered to share their experiences and plan future initiatives. This year's celebration was particularly meaningful because it marked the official transition of the ranch's daily operations to a new generation of leaders. Maya and Marcus had decided to step back from day-to-day management to focus on their international work, while Jake had announced his intention to write a comprehensive guide to community-based development that would capture everything they had learned over the past decade. The ranch itself had evolved into something far beyond what any of them had originally envisioned. It was now a working demonstration of sustainable agriculture, a research center for natural healing systems, a training facility for international development workers, and a home for visiting leaders from rural communities around the world. But Most importantly, it remained the home where a struggling rancher had once brought two frightened children, believing that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. The kitchen table where they had shared their first meal together was still the center of family gatherings. The front porch, where they had made their most important decisions, was still the place where major plans were discussed and celebrated. As the celebration continued into the evening, Jake found himself standing in the same spot where he had once buried his beloved bull Thunder to pay for the twins' freedom. Now, a memorial garden marked the location, with plaques recognizing the thousands of families who had been helped by programs that traced their origins to that desperate act of love. Maya and Marcus joined him in the garden as the last guests departed, and the three of them stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear over the Montana landscape that had witnessed their transformation. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't seen that newspaper article about Vernon Cross? Maya asked, referring to the investigative report that had exposed the conditions at Cross's foster operation and led to Jake learning about their situation. I think we would have found each other somehow, Jake replied. Maybe not in the same way, but I believe some connections are meant to happen. Marcus smiled, thinking about all the young people who were now experiencing their own versions of that same connection in communities around the world. The best part is that it's not just our story anymore. There are hundreds of families out there who are discovering what we discovered, that helping others is the fastest way to heal yourself. As they walked back toward the house, Jake reflected on the unexpected turns their journey had taken. He had started as a failed rancher trying to save two orphaned children. He was ending as a globally recognized expert in community development, but more importantly, as the father of two remarkable young adults who were using their experiences to transform the world. The Morrison Ranch had become proof that extraordinary things could grow from ordinary acts of kindness, that communities could overcome seemingly impossible challenges when they refused to abandon their most vulnerable members, and that the most powerful form of international aid was simply believing in people's capacity to solve their own problems when given the right support and encouragement. The story that had begun with tears of desperation had become a legacy of hope that would continue to inspire and guide communities around the world for generations to come, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of love can indeed change everything. 25 years had passed since Jake Morrison first met Marcus and Maya in Vernon Cross's barn, and today marked a homecoming that would close one chapter of their extraordinary story while opening another. The occasion was the dedication of the Morrison Center for Family Resilience, a state-of-the-art facility built on the original ranch property that would serve as the permanent headquarters for their global network of rural development programs. Maya, now 39, and recently appointed as Special Advisor to the UN Secretary-General on Rural Development, had returned from Geneva with her own two children, 8-year-old Sophia and 6-year-old Diego, who were experiencing their first extended stay at the ranch that had shaped their mother's life. Marcus, 38, and director of the World Health Organization's Global Traditional Medicine Initiative, had brought his family from their home base in Kenya, where he had spent the past 5 years establishing veterinary training programs across East Africa. Jake, now 67 but still vigorous from decades of ranch work, stood on the platform overlooking a crowd of over 2,000 people who had gathered from around the world for the dedication ceremony. Representatives from the 89 countries where Morrison model programs now operated mingled with local families, government officials, and the 3 generations of children who had been directly impacted by the ranch's programs. The most honored guests, however, were the original participants in the Morrison family's journey. Carlos, Isabella, and Miguel, now in their 40s and each leading major international organizations, sat in the front row with their own families. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, now retired but still serving as an advisor to the ranch's veterinary programs, beamed with pride as she watched Marcus's children play with the next generation of program participants. Even Sheriff Tom Bradley, now 82 and using a walker, had made the trip from his retirement home in Billings to witness the culmination of the story that had begun with his desperate phone call all those years ago. "When I called Jake about 2 orphaned kids who needed help," Tom told a reporter before the ceremony, "I thought I was asking him to solve a small problem. I had no idea we were starting something that would change the world." The dedication ceremony featured presentations from young leaders whose communities had been transformed by Morrison model programs. A 17-year-old from Bangladesh spoke about how her village had become completely self-sufficient in food production within 3 years of implementing the integrated farming techniques. A young man from Kenya described how natural veterinary methods had eliminated livestock disease that had plagued his region for generations. But the most moving presentation came from an unexpected source. Vernon Cross, now 78, and having spent his final decades working with former foster children to address the trauma he had caused, spoke about the redemption that had grown from his recognition of past mistakes. "I spent years treating children as burdens," Cross said, his voice shaky but determined. "Jake Morrison showed me that children are blessings. Everything good that has happened in my life since prison has come from trying to make up for the harm I caused to Marcus, Maya, and so many others." Cross had become an advocate for foster care reform and had established a foundation that provided scholarships for young people aging out of the system. His presence at the ceremony represented the kind of transformation that the Morrison family had always believed was possible, even for those who seemed beyond redemption. The centerpiece of the new facility was the Heritage Hall, a museum and educational center that told the complete story of the Morrison family's journey from its desperate beginning to its global impact. Interactive exhibits allowed visitors to experience the challenges of sustainable farming, learn about traditional healing methods from around the world, and explore the principles of community-based development. But the most powerful exhibit was the simplest, a recreation of the original kitchen table where Jake, Marcus, and Maya had shared their first meal together. A placard beside it read, "Every act of love creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. The question is not whether we can change the world, but whether we have the courage to begin with the person in front of us." As Jake spoke to the assembled crowd, he reflected on the unexpected paths their journey had taken. 25 years ago, I thought I was rescuing 2 children, he said. What I discovered is that we rescued each other. And then we learned that the act of being rescued creates an obligation to rescue others. He paused, looking out over the faces representing dozens of countries and cultures, all connected by their shared commitment to the principle that no family should face its challenges alone. The Morrison model isn't really about farming techniques or development strategies, Jake continued. It's about the radical idea that every person has the potential to overcome their circumstances and contribute something meaningful to their community. Our job is simply to believe in that potential and provide the support necessary for it to flourish. Maya spoke next, addressing the particular challenges facing the next generation of rural development leaders. Climate change, global economics, instability and political conflicts had created refugee and displacement crises that dwarfed anything the Morrison family had originally addressed. "The problems are bigger now," Maya acknowledged, "but so is our understanding of what works. We know that sustainable solutions come from within communities, not from outside experts. We know that children and young people are not just beneficiaries of development programs. They are the leaders who will create the innovations needed to address tomorrow's challenges." Marcus concluded the formal presentations by announcing, The next phase of their work, the Global Youth Leadership Initiative, which would identify and train 10,000 young people from rural communities over the next decade to become development leaders in their own regions. Every young person we train will go on to help hundreds of others, Marcus explained. This isn't just about multiplication, it's about transformation. We're not just helping more people, we're changing how the world thinks about human potential. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, the Morrison family gathered once more at the memorial garden where Jake had buried Thunder the Bull so many years earlier. The garden had grown into a place of reflection and renewal, with pathways winding among plants and trees donated by communities from around the world. Maya's children, Sophia and Diego, played among the memorial stones, while Marcus's twins, Samuel and Grace, explored the creek that had been restored and now flowed year-round thanks to improved water management techniques. The sight of the next generation discovering the landscape that had shaped their parents' values brought tears to Jake's eyes. "Do you think they understand what this place means?" Maya asked, watching her daughter carefully examine the plaque. "Commemorating Thunder's sacrifice. They understand what matters," Jake replied. "They understand that family means showing up for each other, that communities are stronger when everyone belongs, and that the best way to honor what you've been given is to use it to help others." Marcus joined them, carrying his youngest daughter, 2-year-old Hope, who had been named in honor of the ranch's legacy. "I've been thinking about what we tell people when they ask for the secret to what we've accomplished," he said. "What do you tell them?" Maya asked. "I tell them there is no secret," Marcus replied. "There's just the decision to start where you are with what you have for the people in front of you. Everything else grows from that." As the sun set over the Montana landscape that had witnessed their transformation, the Morrison family stood together in the garden, surrounded by the living memorial to their journey. The ranch that had once been on the verge of foreclosure was now the headquarters for a global movement. The children who had once been considered too much trouble were now internationally recognized leaders. The man who had once been a failed rancher was now regarded as one of the most influential figures in international development. But the greatest transformation was the one that couldn't be measured in statistics or recognition: the conversion of despair into hope, of isolation into community, and of individual struggle into collective strength. The story that had begun with one man's desperate decision to help 2 orphan children had become proof that love, when combined with determination and community support, could indeed change the world. The Morrison Ranch stood as a testament to the radical possibility that ordinary people, when they refuse to give up on each other, can accomplish the extraordinary. As they walked back toward the house where it all began, Jake reflected on Sarah's presence in everything they had built. She had always believed that the measure of a life was not what you achieved for yourself, but what you made possible for others. By that measure, their life together, extended now across 3 generations and dozens of countries, had been a magnificent success. The Morrison family's story would continue through the thousands of young leaders they had trained, the communities they had helped transform, and the children who would grow up believing that their potential was limitless because someone had refused to give up on them. In the end, what made the whole county cry was not just the rescue of 2 orphan children, but the realization that when love guides action, miracles become not just possible, but inevitable. The ripples from that first act of compassion would continue spreading for generations, touching lives and transforming communities in ways that Jake, Marcus, and Maya could never have imagined when they first sat down together at that kitchen table and decided to become a family. Their legacy was written not in awards or recognition, but in the countless families around the world who had learned that with enough love, determination, and community support, there was no challenge too Great to overcome, no dream too ambitious to pursue, and no person too broken to heal. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.